Well, good morning, everyone. So glad that all of you have taken the time to join us today. My name is Darian Driver Hudson. I'm the president and CEO of the United Way for Southeastern Michigan, and I'm the former superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools and past chair of the Council of the Great City Schools. And today we're going to be talking about something I think that's top of mind for a lot of us as we experience this seismic shift from a decade ago. We were celebrating My Brother's Keeper. We were talking about other programs that helped Black and brown youth, programs that helped keep our children safe. And we were pronouncing that we were sanctuary districts, and that we announced that we would provide safe harbor for our children. And we're in very different times now. And so today we wanted to put a panel of experts together that would help us really dive into these issues that matter for our children, and how we make sure that our school districts, our classrooms, our boardrooms continue to be places where all children, and I emphasize all children, are welcome, they are protected, and they are educated. So today we are going to tackle quite a few topics. It's a short period of time, but we'll do the best that we can to really give you all perspective from a number of different seats within the educational sector. I wanted to share just a couple of really quick statistics that help provide this background for you as well, and I'm sure everyone in the room is very familiar with them. As we've seen the mass exodus of our teachers, over 7% of the total number of teachers have left the profession. That number only continues to grow. Of course, the pandemic is accelerating this. Also, we have seen a massive turnover of superintendents, as many as 1 in 3 in some states. Only 18 of the 77 largest urban school districts have superintendents that have been in place since 2020. We will hear some more statistics. I don't want to steal the thunder from the team, but just giving you the sense of the backdrop as we talk about book bannings and we talk about the cancel culture that we find ourselves in. Also wanted to just lift, you'll hear equity a lot. Inclusivity a lot. These are the things that matter in our schools, and we'll be tackling that. And lastly, some lessons for our aspiring educators and leaders, some takeaways, hopefully a little bit of hope as we move forward in these difficult times. So without further ado, I did want to turn this over to our panel who's going to help us work through this conversation today. First, I'd like to present to all of you Dr. Amanda Alexander. She is the Chief Academic Officer of Scholastic, and she is the former Interim Chancellor of the DC Public Schools. We also have Dr. Michael Hinojosa. He is the Superintendent in Residence for the Council of the Great City Schools and former Superintendent for the Dallas Independent School District. Dr. Barbara Jenkins, the Chief in Residence at Chiefs for Change, and the former Orange County Public Schools Superintendent. And Suzanne Nossel, who's the CEO of PEN America and the former Executive Director of Amnesty International USA. So Suzanne, actually we're going to start with you to give us a little bit of background and provide an overview in terms of what's happening from a legal perspective as it relates to education and freedom of expression and what's at stake in our classrooms. So take it away.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. Look, at PEN America, we're an organization with a mission to defend freedom of expression. And we do that around the world, and we do that in this country. And over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, we've done a lot of work on college campuses, looking at the climate of censoriousness, the debates over safe spaces, trigger warnings. We always had a small focus at PEN America on book bans. We'd get a few reports a year, a librarian somewhere, a teacher somewhere would reach out to us. We'd usually write a letter, and the book, more often than not, would be put back on the shelf. And we kind of did it, as I thought of it, with like one pinky. It was not a big focus. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is a ferocious backlash against books, literature, and ideas. We're about to issue tomorrow, actually, an updated report on book bans in the United States, where we will document, I think, more than 4,000 book bans across the country over the last school year. So this has become an epidemic. Overwhelmingly, as you know, the books target stories by and about people of color and LGBTQ individuals, and it really is a systemic effort to suppress narratives that are helping us to foster a more equal and inclusive society. The rationales used are outlandish. Books are called pornography that, just bear absolutely no resemblance to the well-established definitions of pornography, both colloquially and in our law in this country. And it's become a kind of weapon of choice in the culture war. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has styled himself, as a censor. And he then came forward a few weeks ago to say the claims of book bannings are a hoax because this is just about a few books that are pornography. Well, that's not true. Florida is at the top of the list of states that are banning books. And it's not just books, it's also, as you know, curriculum. Curriculum on subjects including American history, the teaching of race, sensitive topics for sure where we can debate what should be taught. There are theories that are controversial. We can debunk those theories, but that should be the work of educators, a give and take. In an ideal world, kids are just introduced to all sorts of theories and lenses through which to understand American history, and that's how they make sense of it. They form their own judgments, they evaluate. But what these measures do is take certain ideas off limits with the force of law, and they cast a chill. It's not just, this is the way censorship works. It's not just about the books that are censored or the topics that are on the list of what's off limits. Educators begin to think in terms of what may get them into trouble. What is anything like that? Is this book, is it worth buying this book? Because, maybe even though it's not on the list, maybe somebody's going to object to it and they're going to trace it back to me. And so it's a climate of fear. Educators are being urged in some cases to err on the side of caution. And, that environment of intimidation is just the opposite of what we need in this country to foster a democratic citizenry where all ideas are on the table, even tough, difficult, controversial, and sensitive ideas, and you can debate them and you can ask questions and have a give and take. And what this does is shut that down and put a pall in our schools, in our institutions of higher education. So as PEN America, we're at the forefront of documenting this, calling it out, and pushing back.
Thank you, Suzanne. And Dr. Alexander, I wanted to turn to you. You have the purview of seeing what's happening around the country, regardless of the size of our districts. And you've heard Suzanne talk passionately about books, and that's one of the main things Scholastic is known for. So wanted you to just dive in and talk a bit about what you're seeing, what are districts grappling with, and what's happening in our classrooms.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate Suzanne's passion. Being at Scholastic, the largest publisher and distributor of children's books in the world. Before I answer that question, though, I thought it was important for us to be reminded of the topic of this discussion, navigating, and what it means when you navigate something. When you are driving somewhere and navigating, you may make a left turn instead of a right turn. You may need to stop and not ask someone physically for directions nowadays, but pull out your phone or re-navigate. And I think that that's what this is about. Even though I am a beautiful Black woman, I don't have all of the answers, and neither does anyone on this panel. But together, we can sort of navigate this and learn from each other's lived experiences and bring that to bear to this space. And so I thought it was important to say that because this work is never in a state of done. Knowledge is provisional, and we are continuing to evolve and learn more about one another, our differences and our similarities, and I just wanted to say that up front. From my role as Chief Academic Officer, the equity thing that I'm most focused on is in the quality of products that find their ways into classrooms. I was a former teacher, a former school administrator at the school and district level, and there's a lot out there, and some of it is junk. And in my role as CAO, I lead the research and validation team, which focuses exclusively on ensuring the efficacy of our products that we have on the market. So we partner with third-party research firms to conduct RCTs and QEDs to really determine the effectiveness. And it's an equity issue for me, having served in urban schools where the majority of my students were Black and brown, and at times experimented on. And so in my role, it's important that our brand only puts out the best and makes adjustments when we learn we have failed. But I've seen a lot, across the country. Inequities exist in teacher quality and materials, as I've said before, in resources and the way that budgets are set. Some places use a weighted student formula approach. Others fund quite differently. And so those inequities definitely exist, and we see our role at Scholastic in just really helping be a thought partner to districts in navigating this space and helping to address some of those inequities.
Thank you for grounding the conversation around navigation, but also just the gut-wrenching decisions that get made in our urban districts. I appreciate that, Dr. Alexander. I want to turn it over now to Dr. Jenkins. And Dr. Jenkins, we know that you're a highly celebrated and successful superintendent in Orlando, Florida. And you've experienced quite a bit, and you speak so passionately about how you always have to balance the needs of the students and equip your educators and bring your board along when you're trying to make these difficult decisions about what's taught in our classrooms and how you operate your day-to-day functions as a superintendent. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how do you protect our children, how do you protect that instructional core in the classrooms?
That's a great question, and I tell you, it makes you also reflect on how did we get here when such a short time ago we were celebrating diversity and my brother's keeper, and I think that's very telling, Darian, in your opening comment. So, and I like to tell folks, my retirement date was set 5 years out in 2018. That was before the pandemic. So when you think about how we got here, the period of time where we had lots of vitriol and incivility was exacerbated during the pandemic, where there was blood on our hands and we were killing children and we didn't care, and there were debates over whether or not to open schools, and they were ugly. And there were debates around whether or not people should wear masks, and they were ugly. And I think a lot of it resonated from the very highest levels of governance in our country. It made it okay to have that kind of vitriol and to be uncivil. And so we had to navigate in Orange County. Orange County is a blue county, a blue county in a red state. It used to be purple. We're hoping Florida will return to purple. But Orange County, our board had to be very careful because, as Suzanne mentioned, there were statutory requirements that came down, and then monitoring where people felt and still feel as though they are under threat of losing their license, teachers, principals, and board members being removed if they don't follow the letter of the law. So we've had very good legal counsel to make sure we can follow the law but come right up to the line of what's appropriate. For example, if there's something that applies to K-3 students and someone says, well, we really should monitor and make sure we're not doing it in the elementary school at all, because a kindergarten student may walk by a classroom and see something that could come across this law, our answer is no. The law says K-3, then we come right up to the line, to the letter of the law. We don't want anyone to be in jeopardy. We also sent out information to our teachers to help them because they are fearful, rightfully so, because some people have been made example of. So if you're told that your license may be removed if you do certain things, we've sent guidance and guidelines to our teachers to help calm some of those fears. Part of our job as a central office is to help try to keep some of the foolishness away from our children and from our classrooms and our teachers. I think also our board was settled on a principle that and this is hard to argue with among adults that may have differing opinions. You don't just disagree and have civil discourse. You have to hate each other. You got to be just vicious about the opposite side almost. But most people cannot argue when our board says we want every child to come to school and feel safe, feel respected, and feel identified and recognized for who they are. And so we come at issues around that premise, and sometimes it calms all the other rhetoric. I think we've also purposely, Darian, decided not to make a circus out of some of the foolishness. Some people would show up to our pre-agenda, which we purposely do not televise, but they come to the pre-agenda to make a show of certain issues, and sometimes it seemed to be from a script that they may have taken from certain broadcasting agency that just had to settle a suit. Don't make me digress. Anyway, so we purposely did not televise some of the foolishness that would happen in our pre-agenda meetings, and someone would come and talk about CRT. I wanted to say, Dr. Hinojosa, would you define CRT for me, so I make sure we're talking about the same thing, because most of them could not. They were just using a script. And so we'd say, step into the hallway. We don't teach CRT, but if you step into the hallway, they will make you aware of what our social studies standards are. We teach the standards. The standards include Jim Crow law and such, and historical factors. But we purposely tamped down some of the rhetoric and some of the circus that was created by not televising. And then we continue to support our students. In after, I had an advisory council of my LGBTQ plus students. We had all of our middle and high schools have after-school programs for our Gay Straight Alliance clubs. And we purposely made room for them to still feel recognized and appreciated, regardless of what was being handed down from the state level.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective. And, we all chuckle, but we know there is a lot at stake in our classrooms when we talk about some of the energy that is coming from the opposing voices that are trying to hurt us in our schools. So I wanted to talk a little bit about leadership and what's happening at the superintendent level. And Dr. Hinojosa, when you announced that you were stepping down from the superintendency after 27 years in the seat, yes. You are truly a career superintendent. And when you stepped down, 9 of your colleagues in North Texas were also stepping down at the same time. And as we see this exodus of superintendents leaving, it really begs the question, how are we preparing the next generation? And I consider you to be a friend and a mentor. And I think pretty much anyone who knows you feels the same way. And so just share with us your insights, your reflections, and what you're telling this new generation of superintendents about what it takes to do the job now.
Thank you, Darian. Thank you for what you did in Milwaukee. You did a great job there, and so thank you for your passion and now even serving another community that's in need in Detroit. This is a great panel, and thank you for being here. We are in a situation that is difficult. You heard the statistics, that I was a superintendent for 27 years. 13 in Dallas, and 2 things helped me survive. Number 1, I was a government teacher, so I understood politics, even though I was never a politician. And number 2, I was a basketball referee for 7 years. Everybody's always yelling at you. So you can't lose your mojo just because somebody's yelling at you. But not everybody's made up that way. And I didn't retire because of this mess, because I'm not afraid of anybody. I'm not afraid of anybody except my wife, and she knows my wife. That's why I sleep with one eye open. But a lot of my colleagues did. And so as superintendent in residence for the Council of the Great City Schools, we started the Michael Casserly Institute. He was the CEO for the council for 30 years. And so he's seen everything in public education come forward. And so what we're taking are direct reports to the superintendent, including a couple that have worked with Barbara Jenkins, and training them on how to deal with this issue. Now, we're making it very hard to get in. The best thing about Harvard is that they only take the top students and make them better. There are so many programs out there that say they're going to train you. They're really training you to get a job, not to do the job. Our total focus is how do you do the job for the long term. She did it at 10 years in one district. I did it 13 years in another district. So you got to have staying power so you can implement. But we're also teaching them the truth. Session 1 is how to deal with school boards. That's all we did, session 1. Now they've told me we need more every session about how to deal with school boards. And we did that here in LA. Session 2, we did it in DC, and we did media and politics. You can't get to academics if you don't know how to deal with a board, a publicly elected board, and you don't know how to deal with the media and politics. You can't get to teaching and learning. So we have to build that muscle, that intellect on how to persevere. And yeah, a lot of this stuff is garbage. I was a student, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Mexico. And I was in elementary school, read a book about the Alamo, and the goal was to slaughter the Mexicans. How do you think I felt as a kid reading? And when actually there was an invasion of a different color, remember, it's called history. His story, not her story or their story. It's his story. The person that wrote that book. So you got to, when people try to censor you from looking at things from multiple perspectives, it gives you a lot of pause. So we're trying to build the muscle and the intellect and the power to get through these kinds of things. And so when all this stuff hit, oh, by the way, I was a superintendent. By the way, Dallas has 6% white kids, 48% English learners. We have 71,000 English learners. We have more English learners than San Antonio has students, than Milwaukee has students, than San Francisco has students. And so if we don't do well with our kids, we can't do well at all. And we have 21% African American. And by the way, everybody talks about integration. Well, we always blame the white folks. Yeah, they left first in a hurry. There were no suburbs in Dallas in 1971. They left first. But the black middle class went to the suburbs in Dallas too. And then the Latino middle class went to the suburbs. But like Richard Pryor says, who's left? Just us. Poor Latinos and African Americans that left in the city. So, and they're important. So you have to protect them. So I'd call my lobbyists, because we're in a blue city in a purple county in a red state. How's that for fun? Okay, so so the advice I get depends on who appointed them. And so you have to do what you think's in the best interest. You don't watch polls. You listen to students. I went to schools every Wednesday for 27 years, so I could see that for myself. And so I told my lobbyist, does the governor know I'm going to sue him if he comes after us on our racial equity policy? She goes, Doc, he doesn't believe that stuff. I said, what do you mean? He goes, his wife is a Latina, his chief of staff is a Latino. He's just doing it to raise money so he can beat Beto, so he can go after DeSantis, and he's got 3% approval rating so he can run for president, but he'll give him a cabinet position instead. That's what this is all about. There you go, trying to put logic into an illogical situation. And so when people started coming after racial equity and DEI, I said, it reminds me. Some people want to be principal, but they don't want to do principal. Some people want to be superintendent, but they don't want to do superintendent. Some people want to believe in racial equity, but they don't want to do it when the noise gets tough. And so you got to figure out, because militants don't get to the table. And if they get to the table and you're militant, you don't get to stay at the table. So some of us fools had to figure out how to be smarter than the fifth grader and stay at the table and try to help correct these messes. And this is a manufactured crisis. This is not a true crisis, it's manufactured. Y'all know who the author is? Steve Bannon. They came up with this strategy to go after the easiest job to get elected to is school board. Why? Because none of y'all vote in school board elections. So if they vote, they'll start with school boards. Their next step is to go after city council, and then they'll build this battalion of people. Then they'll go after state houses, and then they just keep moving. So we have to be smarter. This will fade, but not right away, because it's very well funded. And they all had a script come into all of our board meetings yelling at us and yelling at our people and talking so horribly about our kids. So, but it is a phase, and we gotta outlive them.
So, Dr. Hinojosa, I appreciate how you've outlined for us what actually goes through your mind when you have to make the call. Do you stand up? Do you stand down? How do you assess risks? So I was hoping, I just wanted to turn it to other members of the panel to just give us some insight into that thought process. I remember when we did our gender inclusion policy in Milwaukee and the different partners we had to bring to the table to make that happen. And again, at that time, it was celebrated. It was 2015, and everyone was excited. And we're in a different time now. So wanted to hear from other members of our panel, whoever would like to speak. How do you assess risk? Who are those key voices that you need to touch bases with to make sure they're a part of the decision?
Well, first, I think you need to make sure all those voices are at the table. And, you know, diverse representation is not just about race, because there are African Americans who do not share the same political or cultural values as myself. So, we've got to broaden that definition of diversity. The second thing I would say is it is important to stay true to your beliefs, your values, your mission. At Scholastic, we have a credo. When I led DCPS, we created an equity framework, and I would encourage you all to look it up. It's still in place to this day, but I'm sure has been enhanced. But it spoke to us thinking deeply about, our people and, our systems, what does it mean in terms of HR and hiring? What does it mean about the curricular choices that we make? So having frameworks and credos and things like that sort of serve as a foundation, a base as something for you to at least attach to and use to sort of navigate this space in a way that's structured. Because these conversations go very poorly, very quickly, when there is no structure. I'm a teacher and I love protocols. And you need those tools in spaces like this to have effective conversations where, to your point, Suzanne, all voices are heard.
Thank you.
I would add, I agree with my colleagues, I would add just a couple of thoughts. One, I want to be very clear, parents have to be a part of the conversation as well. It just needs to be appropriate. So a parent does have a right to decide and to have some say, some input around curriculum and what's happening in schools. School advisory councils are critical, are important. I think when the pendulum swings too far is when a parent says, I'd like to preview every lesson that my child is going to be taught before it is actually taught by the teacher. That's an extreme, to which my answer is, we have an answer for you. That's called homeschooling. And you can do homeschooling. That is your right. That is your privilege as a parent. You can certainly do that. You can pick a charter school, a private school, but even a private school is not going to give you that kind of censorship ability. So I want parents to absolutely be engaged in their children's education, partner with their schools or whoever they want to be their provider. But the level of control that some want over other people's children is just inappropriate. And so I think we have to engage and be strategic, be smart about how we engage so that we are helping to influence what happens in our districts and who gets on our school boards. If a governor is saying we need to be going after these races for school boards, then we need to be activating other resources in our communities to make sure the right people get on school boards. And our teachers need to be part of the conversation. Certainly all of our educators, community members, and activist groups need to engage and be a part of the conversation as well. And a very wise old sage told me when I was at a Baldrige Award luncheon, said, you can do the work of equity without raising a lightning rod. Just do the work. You don't have to beat a drum. You don't have to wave a banner so people come after and attack. How about you do the work and they don't even realize you're doing the work because you've not raised that lightning rod? We can get past some of this by being strategic around some of our efforts, is my thought.
Yeah, just, I agree with that. I think it's sort of a losing battle to come out against parents' rights. We all, those of us who are our parents, when something goes wrong, you want to be able to raise it. But we have established channels for doing that. We have parent-teacher conferences, we have advisory boards, we have PTAs. All of that exists. There's a way to raise it in a civil and appropriate way. What very often this definition, I think what we have to recognize is that the way parents' rights is being defined and weaponized is very dangerous. And it's what you said. It's just oftentimes a single parent, and it may not even be, in Florida and in many counties, you don't have to have a child in the school or in the class to object to a book and say, and at the minute that person lodges the objection, in some districts, the book is pulled off the shelf for a review process that can take a year or 18 months, and the book is denied to kids in the meantime, and that can be on the basis of one person's objection. So that's one individual's, so-called parental rights triumphing over the kid's right to read, the other parent's right to have the curriculum and the access to books that, was previously there. And so I think it's very important not to come out against parents' rights, but to be incisive in terms of how that term is being used and misused, and to assert the rights of the community and the kids and the families as a whole, not of these single kind of crusading individuals who are on the warpath against books.
So how do we create space for intellectual vitality then? Just hearing this conversation, trying to stay focused, trying to get rid of the noise, and at the same time, there are so many people trying to dictate what is happening in our classrooms. How do you create the space?
Well, that's, when you work in an urban setting, so I could keep my staff coming back to work. When they'd ask me a question like that, I said, there you go, trying to put logic into an illogical situation. Things are just cray-cray. You're dealing with people that are... And so you can't let that hold you back. So you got to stay focused. You got to protect the kids. You don't need to be out there being the lightning rod, because there will be people coming after you. But like the whole premise, I got chewed out by a community activist because I wouldn't have a chief of racial equity. Well, I had a deputy chief of racial equity, and she reported to my chief of staff, who was African American. I said, look, it's not the title, but we had put the best teachers in the toughest schools and paid them the most money, because that's where the kids are struggling. We have college and career. We had 12% of our kids get an associate's degree while they're still in high school, and we started with the toughest schools. That's racial equity. So it's what you do, it's not what you say, which is the point that all these ladies made here in the last few minutes. And so you just got to go do it and then show the numbers, and then that's how you do it.
So in Florida, we come right up to the line without crossing the line. We take very seriously and legal advisement around some of the issues. But there are ways. Our young people are so brilliant. They get it. I have several different groups that are my advisory councils. I encourage our young people to be part of the debate club, where they learn how you can actually produce evidence around your argument rather than just insisting that your side is right. So things like debate club teach our children, teach our students how to have civil disagreements and try to prove their point, prove their case logically. And I want to encourage folks who don't have strong debate clubs to really push that for our young people, because it helps them to grow intellectually and to understand, because they don't have good examples right now. I hate that. They don't have good examples of how you can have a civil disagreement. And so things like that and after-school clubs are where we will get the majority of our benefit to our children around this notion. I don't know that there's an opportunity right now to try to have adults engage in those kind of activities, because I think it will just draw out the crazies and make for a circus and a media war, so to speak. And so I would say with our young people, it's outside of the regular classroom in Florida that you can still help them develop these healthy attitudes around debate and civility.
Yeah, I just want to build on what you said about debate. It's funny, I have a book called Dare to Speak, Defending Free Speech for All, and I talk about debate. My own kids have been debaters. I think one of the things that's so central about that experience is when you're a debater, you don't know until about 15 minutes before that round starts which side of the issue you will be on. So when my kids were young in middle school, they were debating, should the Confederate flag be waved? And, they had to prepare both sides of the argument. And, you can't make a racist argument, because that's not going to play with the judge, no matter who the judge is. So you have to come up with a different argument about why the Confederate flag, should be permissible. And maybe it's a free speech argument, maybe it's a historical argument. But once you go through that experience of sitting in both seats and debating both sides, you recognize that on any issue, there is another side. And if you were in those shoes, you could figure it out, and you could come up with some evidence, and you could come up with some arguments. Maybe it wouldn't be your own beliefs, maybe you wouldn't be entirely convinced, but there's a case there. And I think it's a profound mental shift to sit then across from people you disagree with and recognize that, they come at it genuinely. They have their facts, they have their case, they have their reasoning, and that's something that you need to engage with. So I think if we could universalize that, we'd be in a lot of better shape.
I completely agree, and there's power in actually coming together, because it's really easy to fire off an email or, a tweet, but come say that to my face, it's different. When we put people in the same space, they get a sense of their shared humanity, and so I like the idea of the debate and bringing people together in a structured manner.
So we're getting down to our last 5 minutes, and one thing I wanted to ask all of you, and I realize I'm probably the last person that should be asking this question, but how do we stop the bleeding? How do we keep our teachers in the classrooms? How do we keep our superintendents at the helm? And what assurances can we give our families that everything's going to be okay? So I just wanted everyone to get a chance just to weigh in. What do you think needs to happen to make sure that we can stop this mass exodus that we're seeing at all levels in our school systems?
I'll start. I think, we have to remember that we deal with people's two most prized possessions, their money and their kids. They give us their tax dollars and they give us their kids. So people are going to have an opinion. And unlike, not everybody was a plumber. Not everybody served on the city council, but everybody went to school. And they remember their version of school that worked for them. So we have to understand that this is not a linear process. But what we need to do is find people who are hungry, humble, and smart, and work with them to have the skills, knowledge, and attitudes, because this country is dependent. Democracy is ugly, but it's the best thing going. And these people are depending on us, so we have got to get that talent development going.
I am always heartened by the young people, the upcoming educators who will carry this vision, this mission forward. That bright young talent, some of whom are in this very room, I believe will continue to carry things forward. What we have to be most concerned about is a pipeline, because we are not encouraging other young people to enter the profession. So we've got to have incentives, such as appropriate pay, and other incentives around mentorships and coaching and professional development and career ladders. We've got to make it attractive as a nation for our young people, and we've got to do things at the university level as well, so we broaden the pipeline. And then I think, at the end of the day, democracy is something that we depend on, but our public education system is a linchpin of our democracy. It should guarantee an educated citizenry. And without public education, there will be no other means for some children to realize a different future than their parents experienced. So we have to guard our democracy, which depends on, as a major linchpin, public education. And we have to do all we can to build a pipeline, to encourage those who are within public education to stay there, and then to build the pipeline. And for those who are in education right now, we've got a wonderful opportunity from a pandemic. There's an opportunity to innovate and to grow and evolve what happens in our classroom for our young people, and that will invigorate our employees, our teachers as well. It's time for some major renovations in how children learn and grow and receive their instruction in our classrooms. We have to take advantage of that opportunity without this rush back to normalcy. You've heard it before, normal wasn't great to start with. It wasn't serving all of our children. We have to innovate and we have to evolve so it's attractive to those educators who are in the schools now, and also attractive to those who are coming through the pipeline.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Barbara. We definitely have to work on the pipeline piece. And to just add to your innovation piece, I think we need to think differently about the actual workload of the classroom teacher. Teaching is very hard, and there is an opportunity for us to innovate and think differently about the Monday through Friday school week, maybe. Think differently about the load and maybe departmentalizing so that a teacher is just teaching one content area instead of 3. Leveraging co-teachers, student teachers, retired teachers, and other adults in the building to just think about how the load of delivering instruction can be lessened for today's teachers.
Thank you. Suzanne, last word here.
Sure. I guess on the issues of censorship in education, one thing we've just done in the higher education realm, what we found is that college presidents were really afraid to speak out. And in fact, the leaders of the higher education state institutions in Florida had all endorsed what DeSantis was doing. And so we mobilized a group we're calling the Champions of Higher Education, which is now, I think, about 130 former college presidents to speak out very strongly on these issues and offer a backstop and get into the public debate. We cannot leave the debate to a small fringe group of activists that is being mobilized. As you said, they're getting the talking points, they're getting the scripts. There's an organized effort, and we have to meet that by mobilizing what I think is the vast majority. People don't like book bans. Americans don't like censorship, and we need to enable and equip and facilitate for them to speak up.
Thank you. And that actually concludes our time together today. Can we please get a round of applause for our panel?